Welcome to Truth Script Tuesday. This is actually Truth Script Tuesday evening. I think we'll be able to keep it in Tuesday. If we go along, it's possible it'll be Truth Script Wednesday, but it's still Truth Script Tuesday as I'm recording this on the 19th of March 2024. And we have three wonderful articles to talk about, all current, all issues that are ongoing right now, fresh off the press. And so without further ado, I'm just going to jump into the articles and give my summary and a little commentary, and then I'll make a few announcements at the end. So let's start with the first article we have for today, and that is on the Mormon Rebrand by Pastor Richard Henry. Pastor Richard Henry has written for us many times before, and he wrote an article, a good article, on how Mormons are changing the way that they appear to, especially Christians, right? To appear more mainstream, to kind of downplay doctrines that would be considered heretical or unpopular, and to try to look more and feel more like evangelical Christians. So he starts off by talking about Hannah Nealman, who's a social media influencer. She won Mrs. America, not to be confused with Miss America, Mrs. America beauty competition. And she's a trained ballerina. She's just very accomplished. So it goes over how she lives on a farm and all of this. And she's a member of the Mormon Church. And recent years have seen great success for Angel Studios as well. And they've been responsible for The Chosen, The Sound of Freedom, and more recently, The Shift. And then it talks about Studio C. I didn't actually realize this one. The Piano Guys, a musical group, they're Mormon. But yeah, Angel Studios, I guess, has promoted some Mormon stuff, and they are owned by Mormons. And so it's just kind of acknowledging that there's a lot of Mormon family-friendly kind of stuff that appeals to Christians. And why shouldn't it? When Hollywood's cranking out what Hollywood's cranking out, Mormons doing traditional looking, and sometimes they are actually just very traditional things are going to appeal to Christians who yearn for a more traditional entertainment and lifestyle and that kind of thing. So what's the big deal with this? Well, you may ask, who doesn't know that Mormonism is a cult? But over the last decade or so, there's been a massive rebranding effort among the Latter-day Saints to change the public perception from LDS and Mormonism to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Many Mormons seek to style their church as another denomination, but that's sadly not where this ruse ends. The change came blatantly in 2018 when the president of the LDS Church, Russell Nelson, stated in a speech the correct name of the church, the following. That's the name of the speech. It's not a rebranding or a whim or cosmetic. I did this because the Lord impressed upon my mind the importance of the name he decreed for his church. Nelson states that it's a correction, but does not get into the details of what took so long to fix the supposed name mistake. Further, he stated, it is the command of the Lord. So in other words, this from an outside perspective, it seems like this is a rebrand. This is kind of like when Crew changed their name from Campus Crusade to Crew to be more appealing, because Crusades are kind of not as appealing anymore on a college campus. But he's saying, no, there's just the Lord. That's what he wanted. And there's no other reason. Unfortunately, this only adds to the muddy and dark history of the LDS Church. Mormonism has a bad name in the minds of many, so recreating the church as just another denomination is a way to save face and not be seen as a cult in the minds of many. Article goes on, talks about deep differences, and in one Lord, in Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, this is from the Nicene Creed, begotten of the Father before all worlds, God of light, light of light, very God of very God, begotten, not made, being of one substance with the Father, by whom all things were made. And the very God of God this is a historically orthodox biblical view of Jesus. And this is what Mormonism contradicts. Mormons hold the unique belief that God the Father and Jesus Christ are two distinct beings. So they believe that God and Jesus are wholly united in their perfect love for us, but that each has a distinctive person with his own perfected, glorified body. And so he quotes some examples of this from the Mormon Church website to prove that, and talks about how God planned for the earth to be created and for us to live away from him for a time, and Jesus would make up the difference, meaning he would do what we couldn't do for ourselves after we'd done all that we could. And that's a direct quote actually from the Book of Mormon. That Jesus, he's the Redeemer, right? They'll say that. They'll use very evangelical language, but it's after all that we can do. It's definitely a works righteous system, and much more blatant than even like the Roman Catholic Church, right? And other groups that are that have these weak areas where there's things like imputed righteousness. Like, this is just in your face. It's after all you can do. So you have the works righteousness element too. Mormons believe the Father and the Son are different beings. So it goes into this quite a bit more and talks about how in Joseph Smith's mind, he really just repackaged an ancient church heresy called Arianism. And Jesus does not make up the difference for sinners. So it goes into critiquing that and how Mormonism is a works righteousness system. And either the LDS church is correct and the Bible is flawed, or the historic Orthodox biblical faith passed down for centuries rooted in Scripture is correct, and the Mormons are wrong. So there's really no way to reconcile these two belief systems. But it talks about how LDS membership actually grew by more than 200,000 in 2022, while the overall growth rate of the church has cooled in comparison to the 80s and 90s. There are more Mormons today than there have ever been. And that's interesting to me because, there's so many people leaving the Mormon church. And just as you see deconstruction, they call it, happening in the evangelical church, the Mormons have had a huge problem with that going back, I would say, even farther and at a greater level. But they actually grew, according to the last stats that we have access to. And it talks about how you have other political commentators on the conservative side that are Mormon. Glenn Beck is an example of that. And there's an opportunity in this. The good news is that Jesus Christ alone is our only true hope, including for Mormons. That's the only hope that they can have. And the rebranding of the LDS Church presents an opportunity for biblical Orthodox Christians. Just like any other works-based salvation system, Mormons rely on their own merit to gain God's favor. And this is stressful. There's an insecure place to be, and it relies on a great amount of outward performance. And so it's worth noting that what Mormon influencers like Hannah Nealman are presenting is indeed wholesome and good. So some of like the lifestyle things and it's not necessarily connected to the Mormonism, just they happen to be Mormons. But that, this perception is not entirely, it doesn't really like, doesn't characterize the entire faith. So there's actually theological doctrine. There's beliefs that the Mormons hold that violate, contradict. He just goes over two of them, but there's many more that contradict biblical Christianity. And so, don't be fooled by the aesthetic, basically, is what he's trying to say. So good piece by Richard Henry. And so just be aware of that, especially if you live out in like Utah or Idaho or out in areas where there's a high concentration of Mormons. The next piece is by Mark Devine. This one got a lot of traction. This was tweeted out by a political commentator on Sunday and got plenty of likes, Eric Metaxas. And so so I'm not sure what the count is because I haven't looked it up, but I'm sure thousands and thousands of people have read this. And the title of it is Pastors MacArthur and Piper, Keeping Faith Out of Politics is Neither Possible Nor Proper. Now, he goes over John Piper and John MacArthur's kind of like, he traces their stances over the years and has a lot of quotes from both of them. And that they've kind of, both of them maintained a consistent public posture discouraging Christian political involvement. Yet both support Christian colleges and universities, and these universities, would include political tracks and those kinds of things, classes and politics. So there's an inconsistency, and you see that from the beginning with this, that Piper and MacArthur exhibit reflexive sympathy for separation from the world practiced by non-reform Anabaptists. So he's saying they actually, despite their reformed theology they say they have, they actually seem to operate more like Anabaptists, or like they lean that way. And MacArthur contends that Christians involved in politics too often fall into the temptation to cross the divide between the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness and borrow things from the kingdom of darkness that you think are going to aid you. And I pointed this out recently on my other podcast, Conversations That Matter, that's a recent quote from John MacArthur. And it's also it's a telling quote, because it means that politics isn't like a neutral tool that can be used by good or bad forces necessarily. Like, it in itself has a label attached to it. It's part of the forces of darkness, politics, political tools. So, but then, he also says things like we ought to stand up against abortion and gay rights and the ERA. And so he said things like that before too. So, does that involve voting? So there's so many questions that people have. Mark Divine gets into this, how there's a lot of, there's just a lot of tension and have like contradiction and so forth. You can't really, you can try to make sense of all the quotes, but they're not going to jive with each other. So you can't actually do it. He says, since the rise of Trump and the death of George Floyd, one senses that much of the elite class of evangelical leaders have not so much lost their former footing where the intersection of faith, culture, and politics are concerned, but rather they're discovering that they never had much of a solid standing in the first place. And I think this is a really good observation that, it's really more circumstantial than anything. They didn't have to think in deep terms. Like, when we had a more positive world and then a neutral world when it came to Christianity and the way it was viewed, we didn't have to do the thinking we have to do now in a negative world where Christianity is seen as a negative. And he talks about, could it be that until about a decade or so ago, the American church, Christian institutions, and individual Christians have enjoyed the freedoms and protections afforded them in the Constitution to such an extent that deeply developed convictions about many matters related to church-state relations just has not commanded much attention? And I think that's really what's going on here. I mean, you could try to put an ism on this. I even said, I think I sense a fundamentalism, and some of these isms may actually affect how they're viewing things, but I think this actually makes the most sense. It's circumstantial. We haven't had to think about these things, and now we do, and that really is a sea change. And you saw this especially, I think, with the fact that when California was going after Grace Community Church, which John MacArthur pastors, he got more kind of involved in that. Like, he preached a sermon against the governor. They lawyered up and they went to court, and they won, actually. And you saw this kind of like this involvement, but it's not always that way. So he talks about, though certain aspects of Piper's and MacArthur's eschewal of political involvement parallel those asserted by streams within the Radical Reformation, reach back to the 16th century. In one respect, they do not. Like the radicals, both fear political loyalties may compete with Christian loyalties and result in a distorted, impaired, or muted Christian witness. Political loyalties threaten to co-opt Christian ones, fair enough. But radical reformers leverage their separation from politics to secure freedom, to deliver prophetic warnings and divine judgment of civil authorities, both for the sake of God's glory and to serve their neighbor and fellow citizens. And he gives some historical examples of this. Pilgrim Marpeck's evangelical radicalism. So he's going back to some of these more radical Reformation, they're called, but Anabaptist groups. I think it's John, but Ziegler, appealing to Romans 23:23, preached against tithes and rents to the clerical holders of landed properties. John Wolfe excoriated the magisterial divines for turning the populace against the mere externalities. So he goes into all these Anabaptists. Otto Brunfels, he's a non-Anabaptist radical, but he opposed mandatory tithes and feudal dues. So they did like get involved in political things at times. So in contrast, an array of Reformed evangelicals, including Piper and Tim Keller, have stated wariness for political involvement, and far from freeing them to criticize the Democratic Party, it's resulted in their protection from that party and the forces it controls. And so it just goes into how this is a problem. And, I know Mark Divine, I've met him personally, and I've emailed with him, and, I'm sure he has a lot of respect for John MacArthur and even John Piper. And it's this one area during an election year that he, and I would agree with him, that there's a weakness here. And I think it's probably due to what he's saying. There's just an undeveloped and a really not a well thought out political or public theology. So feel free to disagree with me on that. And if someone wants to write an article making sense of those views, you can go to TruthScript and submit that. So the last article we have is The Search of Titus 2 Influencers, a call for biblical femininity in the negative world. The negative world meaning the world that we live in now, where Christianity is essentially viewed as a negative. And Amy writes that a couple of weeks ago, a seemingly random video lit a firestorm on X, formerly Twitter. And I talked about this on my other podcast, Conversations That Matter, but there were a group of co-eds dancing suggestively to a song containing the lyrics such as "Shake It for the Camera." And Christians were split as to how to view the young women's behavior. I'm just going to be honest, I was kind of part of this split until I heard the lyrics, and I was like, okay, there's really, because there's like different girls were dressed differently and doing slightly different movements and so forth. But then when I heard that that's what they were mostly all singing, didn't really. I was against it. I'll just put it that way. So she says that some focused on their lack of discretion, others discounted it as just another benign viral dancing video. Still, there was something missing from the conversation. What stood out to me most was not easily noticed, but upon further reflection has larger ramifications. A little girl with a big yellow bow in her hair, struggling to keep in lockstep with the group. See, I didn't even notice this. I wondered what kind of impression this type of display was making on her and other girls growing up in the post-Christian America. What type of femininity are young women learning through social media and pop idols of the larger secular church? Wow. Or secular culture. Sorry. It was a Freudian slip. Christians throughout history have battled against the insidious influences of the pagan cultures around them. However, as a nation founded on Protestant beliefs, we find ourselves in uncharted territory. The morals and values that we once shared as a country are now considered toxic and hateful. The topic of gender is especially under attack. So she goes into some of this and talks about that this viral video made this very clear, that when one such woman shared how she longed to stay at home with her children, but could not sacrifice her comfortable lifestyle. Young women today are looking for alternatives to what feminism offers, but due to a dearth of godly examples in the church, are looking to the internet influencers they have responded. This last sentence, this kills me a bit. I'm going to read it again. Young women today are looking for alternatives to what feminism offers, but due to a dearth of godly examples in the church, they're looking to the internet and influencers, and they have responded. So this is the trad wife movement. And I'm not going to get into all of this, but she talks about it. She defines it, describes it. And there's a sort of an aesthetic to it. 50s era kitchen, pioneer style homesteading, beige mom, domestic goddess. I'm honestly on the outside of some of this, but she understands this more than me. And, talks about how some of these influencers are good entrepreneurs. It's kind of a fad. And that there's actually the most popular is a Mormon. We actually just talked about her in the last article by Richard Henry. And the current generation of wives and mothers has seen the negative effects of feminism. And so they turn to this, some of them at least. And the biblical teaching is that wives should be supporting their husband through managing the home while deferring to him as the head of the household with loving respect. But detractors to this movement, rightfully so, argue that homemade sourdough and frilly aprons do not make a biblical wife. Many of these influencers do not have a solid Christian theology. So, and I think Allie Beth Stuckey has been the most prominent vocal voice against this. And it brings up the question, if social media influencers cannot provide a truly biblical example of femininity and motherhood, to whom should they look? And so she has a proposal. Modesty has fallen on hard times. Millennial women in the egalitarian camp claim to have deconstructed from the purity teachings of the 1990s that body shamed women. She gives several examples of this and how this has taken place in the evangelical world, and very helpful. If you have daughters, I would suggest just reading this whole article, because there's a lot of things that I think are helpful in it, and things that I'm not even aware of, names and books and so forth I have not heard of, but Amy has. So she's writing about them. She says that the complementarian view of modesty is rooted in the idea that women's bodies are dangerous, which drives a desire to police what women wear. This is actually the assumption that's out there that people are running away from. And this places the onus on women when men are tempted. And so this is viewed with distaste. To broadly state that modesty promotes the subjugation of women, is to flout biblical wisdom and basic biology. The book of Proverbs warns young men to avoid the tempter's snare, and a lack of discretion in women is as irreconcilable as a gold rings in a pig's snout. Women, on the other hand, typically have different temptations. Like their ancient mother Eve, they are vulnerable to deception. As the Apostle Paul notes to Timothy, Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. So feminism in all of its iterations has ushered in a great delusion to the church. So if the proverbial train has already left the station, where do we go from here? So talks about Aaron Wren's life in the negative world, and he devotes a chapter to the great gender dilemma, citing John Piper and Wayne Grudem's complementarian and egalitarian framework as a tipping point for third way approaches. And Wren states that theologies of triangulation are also likely to fail in the long run, just as Clinton-Blair politics are out of favor today. So third way approaches in theology are losing their luster. Wren admits that there are no easy solutions since the negative world has become hostile to all forms of accountability to God's created order. And so Amy says that she asked, what if local churches ditch the women's Bible study curriculum and conferences and actively practice the instructions given in Titus 2? So basically ditch this whole sort of reconciliatory third way approach and just go, and not follow the trad wives, but recognize that there is something there that is attracting women, and and go after the women who want to escape from the anti-biblical feminism stuff. And not just a matter of pragmatics, but actually, go back to what Scripture teaches on these things. Seeing that the younger generation are yearning for a timeless, truer form of femininity, older women who have bucked the feminist cultural trend can offer clear biblical instructions on how to live as God-honoring wives and mothers. This would be a dramatic shift from current women's ministry trends, which resemble therapeutic counseling sessions rather than a means of training young women to love their husbands and children and to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind, and submissive to their own husbands. And pastors may assume that women are receiving this teaching from their mothers, but as mentioned before, women of past generations largely have imbibed the secular model of womanhood. So these Proverbs 31 women can provide a godly example to emulate. So, it's like this with a lot of things. Like, it's not just the trad wife thing, but you have the manosphere, and people have sort of bemoaned, like, how come like Andrew Tate, and I'm blanking on some of the other guys in the manosphere, like Joe Rogan, right? How come they have Christian guys, Jordan Peterson, they like to listen to them, and we don't have really many equivalents if any, in the Christian realm. And, I think we do. Many of them are probably in smaller churches and so forth. And there may be other things going on here. Like, maybe the reason for the popularity of like a Joe Rogan is because it's people don't really want, a large swath of people don't really want the Scripture. But I do think some things are changing. You do have guys out there like Michael Foster, who's kind of in the manosphere, but he's a Christian. And he's spoken at like even secular manosphere kind of events. And there is a rising tide of younger guys. Like I think of like Brian, I don't know him well, but Brian Suave, I think is how you pronounce his name. And Eric Kahn. Eric, I know better. Like, I think those guys they're younger, but they're also like very big on biblical masculinity. And, Zach Garris, of course, there's guys that are like this. And so Amy Simmons is suggesting that, hey, women can like be unapologetic, and you don't have to like go to these trad wives who are Mormon or whatever. Like, there can be Christians who model and do it in similar ways, model a biblical womanhood and being a wife. As the world gets darker, the countercultural believers need to shine brighter. I think she's right about that. So it's a great article by Amy Simmons, great encouragement, and maybe let the wheels turn in your head. What could you do in order to contribute to something like this? Okay, well, just a few announcements in closing here. Those are the 3 articles. We have some conferences coming up. You can go to the Stand Firm Conference in Middleton, Idaho, and that's coming up April 26th through 28th. There's the March 4th through 5th conference in St. Croix, Wisconsin, Be Not Conformed, it's called. Go to truthscript.com/conference if you want to check those out. Also, I should say the retreat is the men's retreat. It's not there right now on the TruthScript website, but it is open for registration, and you can See if I can remember this. Fundamentalsconference.com. That should take you right there. And sure enough, it does. And you can register. There I am with a mustache. So if everyone wants to see me with a mustache, fundamentalsconference.com. And Dr. Richard Vargas from the IFCA. He's the president of the IFCA. And then I'll be there, AD. My father, who's a pastor, is going to be there. We may have some more. There's some pictures from last year, but you can check that out as well, fundamentalsconference.com. But back to TruthScript, we have 2 conferences coming up. And if you want to contribute to TruthScript, you can certainly go to the donate tab at the bottom or the publish tab. And the publish tab is for those who want to write for TruthScript, and you can submit an article. So we are a 501c3. We appreciate whatever help that you can assist us in. We do have a lot of things coming up that aren't free. So we're looking to expand and grow as much as we possibly can. And we just appreciate your support. So that's TruthScript Tuesday. And sure enough, I finished it on Tuesday. So I'm sure most of you are going to be listening on Wednesday. But for TruthScript Tuesday, I am John Harris. God bless. Have a good evening.